I'm Ryan Craig, and I have a new book coming out called Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to College. And actually, I have copies here that I'm allowed to give you in an hour outside and sign them if you really want that. But the good news is that you won't need to read the book if you listen to me for 24 minutes and 22 seconds. So here we go. So the basic concept here is that the US leads the world in lots of things, but unfortunately we also lead the world in student indebtedness and underemployment. And student debt is well reported. Nobody here will be a stranger to these stats. The fact that 1/3 of all borrowers who graduated between 2006 and 2011 have already defaulted on their loans. This quote from a recent magazine, "Stop calling millennials the Facebook generation, they're the student loan generation," is not inaccurate. And it's resulted in a high level of unhappiness among alumni who would make different decisions if they had to make it again today. And some of whom would sell their organs to get rid of their student loan debt. The fact that among parents are unhappy, students are moving back home. It's amazing to me. In a 10-year period, the number of states in which a majority of young adults actually lived independently declined from 35 states to 6 states, entirely a product of student loan debt. And it's definitely impacted policy thinking in Washington, D.C., to the point that on the right, at least, it's become now orthodoxy that there need to be alternative pathways to college. So I call the millennials the student loan generation. They're sort of the cursed generation. Along every economic metric, they're far behind prior generations. If you look in terms of wealth, in terms of housing, in terms of new business creation at a time when it should be easier than ever to launch a new business. And that's led to this issue, which is sort of a hard-headed practicality in terms of how millennials think, and now Gen Z think about post-secondary education. If you'd surveyed young people who are matriculating into a post-secondary program 18 years ago, and you'd asked them why they were doing it, only about 50% would have told you that it was primarily or solely related to employment outcomes. Today, if you ask that question, it's north of 90% consistently. So you have a generation that's been trained to be very pragmatic about post-secondary education, and hence I think you sense the theme at this conference of employment and employability. Hopefully we've been part of helping to galvanize that conversation. Now, part of the reason why we've had this, what we call employment imperative, is that it's gotten a lot harder on the hiring side for young adults to start their careers. Why is that? Well, because every good job now, unlike 18 years ago, is posted online. Every online job posting generates 300, 400, 500 resumes or applications. No hiring manager is capable of pouring through 300, 400, 500 resumes. And so every mid-sized and large enterprise utilizes what's called an applicant tracking system. And it's a keyword game. It's a keyword match game between the skills that are listed in the job description and the skills that the ATS is capable of parsing and finding in the resumes. So you can see here, this is a PR firm. This was an op-ed in the New York Times where this owner of a PR firm was recruiting for an account director role. And who applied? Auto collections managers, home health aides, visual merchandisers. How do you sort that? So they're using applicant tracking systems to sort and figure out who they'll actually consider, who they'll actually talk to. And at the same time, we've now seen a proliferation of technical skills in job descriptions, particularly for entry-level jobs across every sector of the economy, to the point that technical or digital skills now outnumber all other skills, cognitive and non-cognitive skills combined, across virtually every sector of the economy. Now, there's a good reason for that and a bad reason for that. The good reason is that the economy is digitized. The bad reason is that there are only so many ways to say critical thinking, communication skills, problem-solving skills. There are any number of ways to add technical skills to a job description. So these poor hiring managers and HR managers who are under assault from these hundreds of resumes and applications, they have the natural inclination to add skills, add keywords to the job descriptions. Which keywords are they adding? They're adding technical skills. They're adding digital skills. And as a result, many more college students than 18 years ago find themselves invisible to hiring managers. They just simply don't have these technical skills. Now, what are they? They could be coding, but more often than not, it's the name of a SaaS platform, software that's being utilized to manage a business function, right? And here are about 300 of them across industries. Virtually, every entry-level job, every professional entry-level job uses software or SaaS platforms to some extent to manage a business function. These are in the job description. The number of colleges and universities that actually train on Salesforce, well, 10 by my count. So employers aren't seeing the skills they're looking for. They're unhappy. They're resorting to a combination of degree inflation and experience inflation. So experience inflation would be Salesforce experience required. Degree inflation would be you must have a master's degree. And they're leaving lots of jobs unfilled, 6 million by our count. And so we've analyzed, you look at job descriptions and you look at them in terms of bachelor's degree required or not required, and you look at them in terms of experience required or we'll accept entry-level jobs. And the high education, low experience quadrant is sort of emptied out over the last 15 or so years. We call it the empty quadrant. And then one other note, another reason why young people are now so employment focused is that there's simply less exposure to paid work. They're encouraged throughout high school and college to focus on other than paid work, to focus on extracurricular activities, internships, primarily unpaid internships, travel study opportunities. That's how you get into college. That's how you get ahead. For many students, for the first time, by the time they hit senior year, it'll be the first time they'll ever have experienced paid work. And so they have no sense of capability of actually earning money in the workforce. And it's adding to the anxiety around this first job issue. Colleges and universities, not great at aligning their curriculum to employer needs. They don't have a good interface. Some would argue they have no interface for actually engaging with employers around what employers actually need. Career services is generally not that interface. And this is an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education last year that reported on a UT, University of Texas, new program in cybersecurity. And it talked about how it was amazing that it only took 2 years to develop this whole new program, but then it asked this question, which is, but isn't this a trap? Because won't this curriculum be obsolete in 5 or 10 years? And I ask you, what other industry would say, well, let's not develop this product because it might be obsolete in 5 or 10 years? We wouldn't have iPhones, we wouldn't have medical devices. That, in my view, is the prevailing attitude in higher education. It's not worth our time because it could be obsolete in 5 or 10 or even 3 years. Career services, not a great interface. Andy Chan is here, says career services must die. We couldn't agree more. So the reactions to all this, the affordability crisis, the employability crisis, there are 3. The first is free college. Obviously, if college is too expensive, let's make it free, regardless of the outcomes, regardless of the employment outcomes. The second is the rise of what we call the anti-credential, which is folks dropping out and actually flaunting the fact that they've dropped out as a credential. And it's a real thing. We've written about it. And the third are students voting with their feet away from 4-year colleges, particularly non-selective colleges in rural or non-urban areas that are further away from where the jobs are. So those are the schools that are most at risk. For-profit schools have seen it happen first. Next up are non-selective schools outside of dynamic urban areas, public and private institutions. So this is all setting the stage for what we call the faster and cheaper revolution. And here's what we mean. So this challenge is solved by what we call last mile training. We've borrowed this term from the world of telephony, where the last mile is the hardest and most expensive to build, but the most valuable as well. And in the education or talent market, what we mean is the combination of technical or digital training at a minimum, so you're not being screened out by the ATS, and hopefully actually being trained on exactly the systems, processes, software that employers are looking for. And then second is a placement function, to be able to actually reduce that hiring friction, make that connection, to make it even easier for the employer to say, yes, I want this person who's coming in without any experience at all. And we'll give you some models of pathways doing that. If you think about this matrix, where on the x-axis you have, does the program cost money, or is it free? And on the y-axis Is there some sort of guaranteed employment outcome, or is there no guaranteed employment outcome for students? You know, the bottom left quadrant, that's the universe of higher education, my friends. That's what we've always known. That's it, right? You pay your money up front, you takes your chances, no guaranteed employment outcome. We are actively investing, backing, writing about, evangelizing around options that are up and to the right, meaning a better risk-return profile for students. You may pay for the program, but there's a guaranteed employment outcome, or effectively guaranteed. Or you may not pay up front, but hopefully you get both, the best of both worlds. You don't pay up front, and there's an effective, there's a guaranteed employment outcome. So here's sort of version 1.0 of this, which are boot camps. So Galvanize or General Assembly, you can use that as an example. PrepMD, another one. It's not just in coding. We have companies that are doing this in healthcare, medical devices, for example. So they charge tuition, but the employment outcomes are exceptional. You're coming out making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year and being placed at a rate of sort of 80, 90%. Good, strong outcomes because they're highly aligned to what employers are actually looking for. Then you have programs that are in the bottom right quadrant. So these are programs where there may not be an employment guarantee, but they're at least free. They're not charging any tuition up front. So Mission U. Mission U is a program that it's a pathway. It's a year-long college degree replacement that started last fall in San Francisco for careers in data analytics. One-year pathway to a good first job making $70,000 a year in data analytics. They're doing it in one year. It's primarily technical training in a boot camp-like environment where you're doing sort of soft skill, cognitive skill development around the technical training, the SQL, the Python training for data analytics. And the kicker is that there's no tuition. It's entirely income share, so you don't pay anything up front, and they'll take 15% of your income only once you begin making $50,000 a year or more for 3 years. So you're not taking any really financial risk other than your time, the student. They announced it last April. By June, they had 5,000 applicants for their first cohort of 30. Highly selective. They did it again in December for their January cohort. They'll be announcing new programs and new cities in a few months, so watch for that. And Adam, the founder of Mission U, when you ask him what's the credential, he says the credential's the job. That's what students want. They want the job. They don't really care about having the credential. So we do this in other areas as well. Equity Sim is a placement platform for banks and funds using a simulation for stock trading. Very excited about that. Reviture is a platform, is a staffing platform that incorporates last mile training for software development. They're doing it in partnership with colleges and universities like CUNY and ASU, and University of South Florida, around the country. And this year they will probably place 1,300 or 1,400 new college graduates into entry-level software development positions. Tectonic is another example. And so this is also top right, which is, again, free to the student and guaranteed employment outcome. This is a new company we've just invested in. We actually haven't announced it. Maybe I should be talking about it. But it's the first registered apprenticeship for software development. So this is a company that started life as a software dev shop. They'll develop your mobile app. They realized that there was a bigger business and more appeal. Instead of just developing software, they could actually become a dependable source of entry-level talent for their clients. And so the deal is that by weeks 5 or 6, these apprentices, paired with junior or senior developers in the dev shop, begin billing time to clients. And once they build 1,000 hours, clients are expected to hire them. And clients love this. They source their apprentices from local workforce boards. Incredibly diverse, 50% minority, 30% female for software developers, 25% veteran. Clients love this. So again, the value proposition here is twofold. One, you get your dev work done. And the two, it's a novel supply of talent and incredibly diverse and proven, right? You don't have to, when I talked before about hiring friction, there's no hiring friction if it's someone you've worked with for the last 6 months, right? You know they can do the work. They've been doing work on your dev project. So we think, as a firm, that this opens up a whole wide range of opportunities to create new pathways to employment that haven't existed heretofore. So if you believe that you can do it in software development, you can do it in any one of a number of outsourced services that large employers outsource. And why wouldn't they also outsource the provision of purpose-trained entry-level talent for that area? For example, a call center, right? Could you imagine a call center that becomes a pathway for entry-level talent in marketing, sales, and customer support? You know, watch this space. We'll be doing something there. And again, it's all about reducing hiring friction. If you can provide the employer with a candidate that is purpose-trained and where there's very little or no risk of a bad hire or a bad fit because they've already been working for the employer, for the client, you've eliminated hiring friction. And that's what all of these models do. So in the book that I can give you in 40 minutes, we actually, these are the advanced review copies. So we don't actually have this directory in it, but when the book is published this summer, it will have a full directory that Cassidy pulled together. And it's 300 or so programs that are faster and cheaper pathways to digital or new economy jobs. And I just want to make this point that one thing that really gets my goat is when journalists and others conflate this notion of less than bachelor's degree or faster and cheaper alternatives with traditional blue-collar or vocational jobs. Like, yes, we have a need for more welders. That's great. And those are good jobs and well-respected, but welding jobs ain't growing, 20% a year, right? And so all these pathways that we are focusing on and talking about and investing in are pathways to digital jobs, right? And they could be healthcare jobs, but there's in growing sectors of the economy where there's a double-digit job growth over the next decade. So imagine a world 5 years from now where the number of seats in these faster and cheaper pathways goes from, let's say 10,000 today to 4 million, right? And if we have our way, that's exactly what will happen. Suddenly, whether you're an 18-year-old or whether you're a 35-year-old displaced worker who requires retraining, as opposed to the reflex of just going back to college and sitting in a college classroom, you'll really have a real choice about what to do and what sort of pathway to follow. And we think that that real choice requires a real decision matrix. And here's that decision matrix, which is to say, look, if this is a selective school, and by the way, there are only 50 of them in the country, so only 50 schools in the country are truly selective, and it's affordable, which I'll define in a moment. Like, green light, go, do that program. Likewise, if it's a non-selective school and it's unaffordable, big red light, don't go there. The other quadrants are harder, and I'm not going to get into them now, but they're in the book. Affordability, Lumina a couple years ago published what they call their rule of 10, which didn't get nearly as much attention as it should have, and largely because in a world where college is your only pathway, an affordability test is almost academic, right? You're going to go to the program that's most affordable. You don't care whether there's a benchmark for affordable or not. But in a world where you have 4 million, 5 million seats and faster and cheaper alternatives, you really will be able to say, like, is this affordable? Maybe I won't go because it's not meeting this affordability benchmark. So here's what their affordability benchmark says, the rule of 10 says, which is that students should pay no more for college than what they've been able to save through 10% of discretionary income for 10 years plus working 10 hours a week while in school. And you can see what that translates to in terms of total spend on a degree. And you can see there that there's virtually there is no private institution in this country that meets the rule of 10, and relatively few public four-year institutions that meet the rule of 10. So it becomes a real test for colleges and universities when there are choices. And we contend that today, still largely in I think the broader culture, that faster and cheaper or less than bachelor's degree is not a preferred path. I think that within a few years it could become preferred. And I use the analogy of what's happened to American Express. So American Express, when I was growing up, it was you get your first American Express card, you've made it, right? That's sort of what you want. It's sort of like the bachelor's degree, right? It's what everyone wants if it's a mark of your a pathway to professional success. A year and a half ago, Chase came out with a Sapphire Reserve card, which is effectively a faster and cheaper card. It's less expensive than the Amex, and you get points quicker. And within 6 months, they basically killed the millennial market for American Express. It was cooler to pursue a faster and cheaper alternative to the traditional prestigious bundle. So we think that this is, and we know this because we hear from companies who are really intrigued about students who are going through these new and novel, faster and cheaper options. So I think certainly there's going to be sort of a pioneering effect that these students are going to do very well early on, and we'll see if we can keep that up. We think that employers unhappy with the level of talent they're seeing out of the traditional system are more open-minded than I think most people think. Lots of employers have moved to competency-based hiring or have removed degrees, or in some cases even mask degrees in the hiring process because they think that it's a misleading or a counterproductive indicator of talent. I'll actually read this for you. So I think, a decade from now, the fact that young people were encouraged to load up on debt just as they were starting their careers will seem bizarre and anachronistic, a practice that benefited the providers more than the students they aimed to serve. And in hindsight, given all the uncertainty around technological change in the future of work, it will seem incredible that millennials risked taking on all that debt at one time at such a young age. We are not arguing for a reduction in the per capita or aggregate level of post-secondary education. In the current world, the global competitive economy, that would be economic suicide. But we are strongly arguing for a radical restaging of how that post-secondary education is consumed. So we're going to move from all you can eat in one sitting to the lifelong learning model, or as I prefer, the SAS model, which is you buy what you need when you need it. So a faster and cheaper pathway to a good first job where you have no debt, and after a couple of years, you're in a position to look around and ascertain which secondary or tertiary pathway will be best suited for advancing your cognitive skills and helping you move on, move up, become a manager, and so forth. And I do think that in this world, where some will say, well, these people won't have credentials. And I would argue that I think we're past peak credential at this point. That second or third employers, you get that good first job through your faster and cheaper pathway. But second and third employers may not care as much about the credential as they'll care about what your first job was and what you're able to demonstrate. And in a world where achievements and competencies are more easily archived and accessible digitally, I think that's absolutely likely to happen. So I'm going to actually just skip this part. We don't really have time. So if you're a non-selective college in this world, I think, again, the top 50 will be just fine. But what about the other 3,950? I think that non-selective colleges will need to look at creating what we call off-ramps from their existing programs, meaning that even as within the first year, providing employment opportunities, much like Northeastern's co-op program. But in the book, you'll see, and I know the president of Northeastern was just here. I called Northeastern. This is in the book. I called Northeastern and I said, well, what would happen if you here? What would happen if you had a university in the co-op program in the global network who said, I like this sophomore, this junior so much, I actually want to make him a full-time offer and keep him on. And the answer was, unfortunately, well, I don't think that employer would be invited to continue in the co-op program. And that's the wrong answer. So we need to be able to provide off-ramps and then on-ramps back in to the program so they can finish the credential when and if they're ready to provide it. I think there's a role for degrees, for sure, from non-selective institutions, but more along the lines of what Western Governors has done. Relatively, quite inexpensive programs that would meet the rule of 10. So there you go. I doubt, the ability of traditional universities as they're currently constructed to develop these pathways themselves. They do not have the interface with employers that these pathways and intermediaries that we're behind have, because they're not incentivized. So I don't know how you do it. I haven't seen a university-based model for doing it that's not done in partnership. But let me close by saying I think that many of these universities will need to refocus on secondary and tertiary pathways. So serving working adults who are maybe in their 20, 21, 22 years old, who've been working for a couple of years, who will then need those secondary, tertiary pathways to further their cognitive skill development, move on, move up. And it's sort of the, if you will, unbundled master's and professional degree programs with additional sort of gen ed built in to those models. And those programs don't exist yet, and I think there will be a huge need for it. And if we don't succeed in building those, then the nightmare will come true, which is we have less post-secondary education in aggregate and per capita, which is not good for our competitiveness. But we see the shift to faster and cheaper pathways and alternatives as inevitable, an inevitable function of the twin crises of affordability and employability. Thank you.